Hello, and thanks for coming back this week to my Bible study. This week, we're going to be learning about Isaac and how he is moving forward, the promise that God gave to Abraham. Grab yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and let's enjoy the time that we have together today. Let's get to it. Before we start, let me talk a little bit. I want to talk to you. I have some notes, and I wasn't able to post them last week because I like to keep my Bible studies under 45 minutes. So I want to talk a little bit today. If we don't get time, we can do just 2 chapters in the Bible this week. But I did want to make some observations from last week that I skipped on. So the first one that I want to talk about is about Lot's wife and how she became salt because she wasn't prepared. She put her life and her whole world and who she was about the things that she was losing and giving up and the unknown that was coming in front of her. And I think that's the reason why she looked back. And I just want to prepare all of you for a rapture that might be coming. I don't know if there's a rapture coming now or somewhere in the future, but I want you all to understand this. You may be really cozy in your home. You may love your home. You feel protected in your home. You feel protected in your car or in the places that you feel protected and happy. And you think to yourself, God, I don't want to leave this for people, or my family's going to fight over it, or my kids are not going to appreciate where I live or the things that I have or whatever it is. I want you to understand that you have to leave all of that aside. You have to make peace, especially now in our times, that if you're walking in Christ and your heart is in the right place and you've accepted him, you're born again, God has renewed you, that if there is a rapture, you are willing to let yourself go into the rapture. The minute that you put a doubt about, I'm gonna miss my home, or I forgot to do this or that, that is the moment that you are not going to be raptured. So I want you to make sure that you understand this and make peace with that thought. In the next week, it's important for you to say, you know what, I'm leaving this behind for whoever God calls them to have this. I'm going with Christ. I'm going where he's taking me, and I'm going to be so happy that I'm going to be on the other side and not going to have to live with the things that I hear about in Revelation. So let's make sure that we're not like Lot's wife and we don't look back at a moment where God is giving us grace and mercy and he's going to take us like Enoch, just take us away from here. We have to make sure that we're at peace knowing that that's going to happen, and that's exactly where we want to go. No doubt in our mind that that is what we want. Okay, the next one is that I want to talk about too is that it's important when we choose places where our children are going to grow up, because as you saw, the daughters of Lot grew up knowing sin. Sin was around them everywhere. They were exposed to it. And remember, these girls were raised they weren't raised with Abraham, but they knew Abraham. They probably heard about Abraham's God. They probably had at some point connected with Abraham. So that they were so sinful goes to show us that the places that you choose for your children is important. If you're in an area where you know that there's a lot of sin and corruption, make the choice to leave. Maybe God is leading you to get out of that place, get out of that area, because your children are going to grow up with those thoughts and those ideas and the things that are coming on around them from the people around them. So it's important for us to look and decide and talk to God about the places that we're raising our children. I also wanted to talk about Sarah, who was inside, directly connected with Abraham, and how this part is important, where she had little faith in God and Abraham had stronger faith, but she was the one that was pulling him down with ideas and plans and this and that and contradicting the word of God. In him, he was following. So my lesson for you on this is, remember that sometimes the people around us, the closest to us, are the ones that pull us away from God and our calling and walking with the Lord. So make sure that you understand that and you see it. And that's what happened in Genesis. Early in Genesis, remember, that's what Satan did. He beguiled Eve and he turned the question on her about something that God said. He kind of twisted it So we want to make sure that we are strong in the foundation of the word. And that's why we're doing the Bible study, because we're going to get strong in the foundation of the word. So when somebody comes at us, even somebody in our family, we're not going to receive that word. We're going to be able to say, you know what? That's okay for you, but I know my God. I have faith in my God, and I trust in my God. And that's all that I'm going to say to you. If you want to walk with me, great. If not, then, I'm sorry. Or you may have to separate from these people if they're continually trying to keep you from the word of God. These are decisions that you have to make, walking and deciding to walk as a Christian. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is how Lot was so fixated on his riches and his title and his life in the city, and that he ended up getting exactly what he most dreaded, was living a life of a poor man. He actually ended up losing everything and living in a cave with sinful daughters. So as you can see, don't hold tight to the things of this world, the things of the flesh, because it can go in a moment's notice. And then if you look, there's nothing left for you, because it was all based on nothing that was really substantial in your life. But if you base your life on God, like Abraham did, you see the difference between these two men's lives. All right, so let's get into the word today. We're going to read chapter 21 in Genesis, and this is the story of Isaac. So let's begin today. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. This is very important. We understand the Lord, he said he was going to do it. He didn't waver. It wasn't late. It was on his perfect timing. Exactly what he said what was going to happen happened when it was supposed to happen. Not a day later, not a month before. Exactly when he said she was supposed to have a baby, it was done. So we know that our God does not lie to us. When he makes a promise, it comes true exactly the way he says. And it was not, and remember, she was mocking him before that, not believing it. But because she didn't know that God, when he says something, it's going to come to pass. So that's a lesson for us to know that our God is not a lying God. Our God is a truthful God. Once he makes a promise, it's going to be, but it's going to be on his timing, not on yours or mine. We just have to have faith that it's going to come true. Okay, number 2. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. So Isaac is meaning laughter. Remember, she laughed in the last chapters. She laughed when she heard the promise, because she thought, oh, me, I'm an old woman. I don't even have, I'm in menopause. There's no way that I can bear a child. But God did it. God can do supernatural things. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Remember, we talked about that. The 8 days is important for circumcision. It can't be too soon. It has to be on 8 days. Number 5. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. Number 6. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So now she's worshiping the Lord and what he's done for her. She's so happy that she's had this child, and that, she laughed about it, and God still made it true come to pass. Number 8. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. So remember that this is Sarah's natural child, her actual natural child. Not like the other child was what that came through the concubine. This was her natural son. So this was a great time for them to celebrate this. Okay, so then we're going to go down to verse number 9. Says, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abram, mocking. Number 10. Wherefore she said unto Abram, cast out this bondwoman and her son. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. She wants a split between the children, because remember, Ishmael was a lot older than Isaac. I think they were like, he was at this point, he was probably about 16 or 17 years old. So he's a teenager, and she's noticing that there is a risk between the two children. And she could see maybe that there's a risk of even life for her son. Remember what happened with Cain and Abel. So she doesn't think that he should be there, and she doesn't want to split the inheritance of Abraham. So she's putting it on Abraham to solve this problem for her. Now remember, the mocking, the son of Hagar was mocking. So that's why we're saying that there's problems, because this boy is now mocking, the older boy is now mocking the younger boy. And there's probably jealousy in that too. So this is why she's noticing these things that are happening in her household, and she's not liking it, and she sees they're a big problem for her. Number 11. And the thing was very grievous in Abram's sight because of his son. So they're talking about Abraham was grieved when he heard this, that she had noticed this and was grieved. Maybe he, most men are usually busy throughout their day, but women know these things. They see that they're around the children all day long. So they see the things that are going on. Both of them really were his sons, but I'm not sure in this one if he was grieved because of the actions of Ishmael, or I'm not sure if he's grieved because of the things of what he is reflecting on between what could happen between the two, because it just tells us the sight because of his son. Number 12. And God said unto Abram, let it not be grievous in the sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah has said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Verse 13. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. So remember that God has been really good with Abraham. He didn't have to save Lot with it. He didn't have to do anything for Ishmael either, because Ishmael was really a plot of Sarah's and something that was created in the flesh. He still loved Abraham, and he wanted the best, and he knew how much Abraham loved his family. He did love his son Ishmael. So this was grievous in his heart, meaning he felt a lot of grief as to that he had to consider letting go of one for the other one. And remember, he also has the promise of God. So he's got to think, look, I have a promise from God. This child is going to bring this into the future, and I'm going to have to let go of this in order for that to happen. So he's got to let this thing play out the way it's supposed to. Verse 14. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. He just sent her away to go on her way through the desert. That's a harsh thing to do, but he did give her water. But that's pretty harsh to just send her off on her way. I mean, she didn't have like a servant that came with her or anybody else. He just kind of had the faith. Remember, God had told him that Ishmael was going to be okay. So he had at least the faith to say, okay, go your way. And he knew that God was going to watch over both of them. And the water was, this is 15, and the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. Now, this is really weird because they're saying that it's a child, but really he's not a child. At this part of the story, Ishmael is about 16 or 17 years old. So he is not a child. But she put him under the shrubs. I guess she didn't want him to see her dying. 16. And she went and sat her down over against him, a good way off, as it were, a bow shot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. So basically she was ready to die because they had run out of water. They were in the desert, and she was probably losing faith. And it was hard for her to think that she's going to watch her son die first, or that he was going to see his mother die. So those thoughts were coming up in her head. And God heard the voice of the lad. This is 17. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God had heard the voice of the lad where he is. So God had promised Abraham that Ishmael was going to be okay. He didn't promise Hagar, but Hagar is a mother. So she is hearing the call of the angel is hearing the call of the child. The child had called out to the Lord. Understand that the child was calling out to God. So this was a child that was raised knowing God. It wasn't that he didn't know God. Abraham taught him and told him about God. And he saw the miracle of what happened that when his brother was born, because there's no way that 100-year-old woman can have a child. So this child knew about God, and he called out to God, and God heard him. And that's what God wants. That's why God is blessing him with the promise, with another promise that he had for Abraham. 18, arise, lift up the lad and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. So now God is giving her the promise as well. And God opened her eyes, this is 19, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. This is supernatural provision right here. She opened her eyes and she saw it. It was in the unseen realm. And when she heard that promise that God, and she heard God, and she probably also knew about God, because Abraham also taught them about God. She saw what God did for Sarah. So they knew about God. So in the unseen realm, she heard God, she knew God, and this thing just manifested. The promise of God is manifesting for her. Number 20, and God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. 21, and he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. In those days, it was custom for the father to find a wife for the son, but in this occasion, because she was a single mom, it was normal for the mother to find a wife for the son. And this is exactly what she did. She found an Egyptian woman for her son. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ishmael. He eventually had 12 sons. So remember, the 12 tribes of Israel, Ishmael also had 12 sons, and that's where we get Islam and Arabian people and a whole bunch of stuff I'm not going to get into. So Ishmael became a ruler of a large tribe, like we said, which is basically a nation. And these were nomads living in the wilderness south of Israel. I'm reading from my notes. And they were hostile to Israel and to God. I guess there has to be a level of anger or bitterness that was left in his heart against God, because God, he was the firstborn, and God chose Isaac above him. So there had to be some level of resentment left there. And who knows if the mother also had something to do with that. Early on, though, you could see the difference where he was reaching out to God. But over time, he was now living in Egypt, where these people were praising different gods. They were not praising the God. They were praising several gods. So he started to grow up learning about different gods and the magicians and occult and astrology and all the things that were evil practices in those days. They were against God. So this is why he probably built up this bitterness and this anger, because now he didn't have a father, he didn't have a preacher, he didn't have somebody reminding him about God, and he just kind of went with the world and with the flesh, the ways of the flesh. He just kind of went that way. So you can see that when you're not around people that are giving you the word and giving you the word and talking the word and living the word and giving examples, how it's so easy to be swayed in this world by the people around you, like he did growing up in Egypt. Let's go now to chapter 22. Verse 22. And it says, and it came to pass at that time that Abimelech, I'm not sure how to say that, but Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. I'm getting a cup of tea. Number 24, and Abraham said, I will swear. 25, and Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. Reproved in this instant means he was reprimanding Abimelech about it, and violently taken away means that they claimed the land. Usually in that day, when you got there first, you claimed the land. When there was a well, that you found the well, the land belonged to you. 26, and Abimelech said, I would not who hath done this, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard of it, but today. Abimelech is a title of 12 regional kings. This is from my notes. There were 12 regional kings. They were from Philistine. They were Philistine kings. Of this one was the one from the region of Gerar. It's now talking to him about, that he did not know that this had happened. People who were in his official in his, in people that served him, that they did this to Abraham. 27, and Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. So now he gave him some stuff because basically that's supposed to be his, but he made right and gave him something anyway, because he said, look, I'm going to give you this. I just want my well. I made a claim for it. They denied it to me, but it's supposed to be mine. And 28, and Abraham set 7 new lambs of the flock by themselves. So now he's letting the flocks out because this land belongs to him. He's claiming this. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 new lambs which thou hast set by themselves? Number 30, and he said, for these 7 new lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. So this is proof that this well was his, and he's saying they're going to drink from the water here. So that's why he let them go, because he knows that there was a well there and they could drink from. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Beersheba was considered the well of the covenant. This is where Abraham ended up settling. That was his home and his home to Isaac. This is where they stayed for quite some time. Thus they made covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, this is 32, and Pichol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. 34, and Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So this is like I'm saying that he ended up, this is calling his home for right now. This is where God placed him and put him, and this is where he's going to be, to focus on his son, the promise that's coming, and to be a father and a preacher and give rest to his family from all of the things that they've been under, and to be able to make the promise of God a reality. We're going to go to 22 now, and it says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, behold, here I am. And he said, take now thy son, thy only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. Let's talk about this right here. I'm reading from my notes. God tested Abraham to deepen. This was a test for God to test Abraham, to deepen his ability to obey him. And of course, this is going to be a development of character for him. Remember, he wavered a lot in his faith, on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off. Now he's had time. And God says, now I'm going to test this man to see where he's at with me. When we are tested, oftentimes we complain about it to God. But this may just be the reason God is doing it, is to test our character and to stretch our character for better development. which is what he does. He renews us, and he wants us to be closer and stronger with him. The obedience to God is not something that comes naturally and easily, and most oftentimes he puts us we're in situations where we're going to be troubled or fearful, but that is where our fellowship with God is most important. Verse number 3, and Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place of which God had told him. Verse 4, then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar. Now he's been traveling for 3 days with this young man. This child is this, by the way, this kid is not young at this point. He's a lot older. This is not like a little boy like most stories tell you. He's already big. This is his son, but he's older. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. So he's saying the lad because it's not a little kid like most people want you to believe. You know, this is a kid who knows God. He's grown up knowing God. He's heard about God, and Abraham is telling him, let's go and let's do this. So let's keep reading. Number 6, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both off them together. Now it's just him and the child. The servants were left to go back. Nobody's business what was going to happen here. People were probably scratching their head about what's going on, because they didn't bring, I mean, obviously a burnt offering, a sacrifice offering was evident that was going to happen here. So people are probably scratching their head and saying, what's going on here? Because he didn't bring a lamb or anything like that with him. Okay, oh, by the way, took fire in his hand, because that's really weird. And probably you're thinking, like, how do you take fire in your hand? They're assuming that this was like a coal, like a live coal or some type of a live flint where you can start a fire with that. So that's what they mean by that. Not an actual, like, walking around with a fire in your hand. Number 7, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So now this is Isaac asking the father. He says, you know, I see the fire and I see the wood, but where is the burnt offering? The child understands this too. This young man understands this too, that, you know, where is this thing coming from? Number 8, and Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. Number 9, and they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Now listen to this. The kid wasn't complaining. He didn't say anything. He just tied the kid up. Why is he he's living in true faith at this point? Because he knows the promise of God. He's seen the miracles of God. He's seen what God can do. He knew that there's no way that God was going to let him kill this child. That's how strong he was in the faith. This is why they call him the father of the faithful, because he knew in his heart that in order for that promise to come, they had to spare Isaac. So that's where his faith, he had his faith on the promise of something that was not yet done. It was something unseen, because it was something in the future. That's what brought in the next verse that you're going to hear. The next, the verse after that, number 10, and Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. So at that point, he was ready to slice his son, but he was still acting in faith. He knew that God was a wonderful God, and God was going to get him out of this, because the promise that he claimed for so long. At this point, he's learning that God doesn't lie. God is not like a man, that man lies. He has learned by now that God is faithful, and has every single promise that he has given him has come to pass. Never 1 second more or 1 second later. It's always on God's timing. Number 11, and the angel of the Lord called into him of the heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Oh, I'm sorry. Here am I. And he said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. So God considers this child to be his son, because this is the child of the promise. Number 13, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. This is where Abraham worshiped God during his test. And remember this, his son was watching that. He wasn't watching, why did you do this? Are you crazy? You think that are you crazy to do this to me? What are you thinking about? No. He worshiped God because God continued with the promise and his son was watching. The ram substituted for Isaac was the same thing as Christ for us. So if you can see that part of it, the ram substituted for Isaac, like Christ substitutes for us. So Christ was sacrificed for us. The ram was sacrificed for Isaac. That is part of the promise and the covenant coming in the future. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Jehovah Jireh means provider, the Lord of provision. Number 15, and the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time, and said, number 16, and said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this, and hast not withheld my son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thee seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of the enemies. So he is just reconfirming the promise that he gave him about how many people were going to come from the seed of Abraham with this child. Number 18, and in thine seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. So this is where he lived. I just want to talk about number 3 through 10, 22. The pagan nations practiced human sacrifice. This is from my notes. And God condemned it as a terrible sin. This is what the Egyptians used to do. They used to sacrifice children and babies. And God thought it was a terrible sin. This was the things that were going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. There was homosexuality. Well, that's really not what it was called. It was called sodomy. That's why it was called Sodom, because Sodom. God wanted Abraham to sacrifice Isaac in his heart to prove he loved God more than the promised son. A deeper commitment to God through a difficult experience. He learned to obey God and the ability for God to provide. So he learned a couple of lessons. He learned that one thing that you treasure the most, that you look up to, which would have been his son, because this was the son that he's always wanted with his wife, where he was promised something from God. He was willing to let it go. And through a very difficult moment, his commitment was God, was faithful, and he still obeyed God. And then he didn't get mad at God. He worshiped God. He built an altar for God there. So that is a different Abraham here than the Abraham that we've been learning about. And you see how God has been taking him step by step by step and maturing him in his faith. All right, let's go on to verse 20. And it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor. Huz his firstborn, and Booth his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Chesed and Hasu and Pildash and Jilpadin, and Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. That's going to be important coming up, because Rebekah is eventually going to marry Isaac. So it's going to be within the family. These things are going to stay in the family, because God didn't want the seed to be tainted with anybody else out there. So we're going to be reading that later on in the chapters. And with Nahor, Abraham's brother. So they were basically cousins. 24. And his concubine, whose name was Ramah, she bare also Taba and Gaham and Tahash and Makah. So we're just and Makah. So we're just talking here about the different people in the family. I'll leave it at that, and we're going to do chapter 23 next week, because this was a big one this week, and we're already at 40 minutes, and I have to edit this video and get it down. I'm trying to get the videos down to 30 minutes. So I hope that you enjoyed this reading today. Next week we will read 23 and 24, and 24 is a long one, but possibly even get into 25. It's going to get super exciting, because we're going to find out that Sarah passes away eventually, and we'll talk more about all of that. So I thank you so much for watching my Bible study this week. I can't wait to come back and read for you next week again. If you have any prayer requests, please leave it down below. Remember that God takes us through things in our life like he did Abraham, in order to grow our faith, for us to show him that we put him first. And whatever the reason that you are going through something difficult in your life, know that God's got your back. He's going to help you walk through this. So reach out to Jesus Christ, ask him into your heart, and trust that with him you're going to have peace in your heart and get out of whatever situation that you're under. He is faithful. He is not a God that lies, and he will walk with you if you accept him in your heart. So with that said, I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless all of you. Bye-bye.